there's supposed to be someone who's in charge of that now.
How can we reach that? Because I've got a thumb drive in here. I guess I could go into my email, but I like the one on the thumb drive more. But it's not showing up here.
USB. What about try putting it in there? USB HID.
What we got here?
Oh, the Randall.
Yeah, right here.
You hook up to the.
Is it that Randall one right there?
Nope.
No.
Phil, there's a USB up here on the podium.
Yeah, the monitor.
Oh, great. All right.
Give that a shot. I think that's all. So.
It probably doesn't read down there anymore.
Yeah.
Probably.
Man, I'm having trouble seeing this stuff. Is that it?
I wonder if there's another, like, somewhere for you to.
Yeah, there's supposed to be someone to help you guys. I have class now.
Well, you better get going then.
No, we just got out. I didn't see why. I'm surprised it wasn't. We're here now.
I don't think there's one that lives in here.
Did you find him?
No. I'm not seeing it turn up. It should be just sitting down here, right here, but it's not.
I'm bringing our laptop.
No.
Is there a clicker for them to use?
Oh,
I mean, no.
That's what
Sorry. Do you think it's set up to record right now?
it just said that it was recording. They're having problems with their thumb drive. Yeah.
I don't know, voice is pretty high, so I might better do this.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, I have to.
No, it's cool. It's cool. It's cool. It's not anything for me.
They are better you, which is not true.
It's not.
It is not. This is fine.
So I've just been told that I'll be introducing you guys. How many things are you
Oh, we have a.
So, usually.
Oh.
We just say
Yeah.
No, yeah. I'm here. All of you guys, I know. Do you need to sign in for
whenever we get this?
I mean, I'm not sure, but I was just gonna do something on Instagram. I have a lot of stuff. It'll come around.
You guys, can we all sign in this sheet here, just so we have some metrics on people who are here?
Yes.
That would be very helpful for us. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.
We're gonna pass it,
And then there's also the regular sign-in sheet for class, for first graduates.
Just put your name somewhere around here.
All right.
Right there. Alright. Yeah, no problem.
The graduate seminar one's going around. Looks like it's in the front. Can you see your
Yes. Yes, that's Dr.
Okay, hang on. I just thought I'd introduce myself as Dr. Nice to meet you.
It's a very long. It's so dark and noisy.
I'm in the forestry
between our course.
Right. Not even aware that they are.
Yeah, we gotta down that others
No, this is just a graduate seminar class.
animations.
Trying to incorporate professional development.
There we go. Great.
It's true. Development.
Oh, is it?
That I really resonate with.
No, they're not even gambling. They're just playing there. Oh, that is gambling. No,
Yeah,
she's caught up with Mike right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I.
Yeah.
Immediately just playing as a gambler.
Development.
Did I seem like a gambler? Yes. Really? Yes. You're like,
We are, there's a big conference going on, so that's why about half the faculty and the majority of the students are attending.
Can you help us with that?
I was pretty successful on
Which I know is
one thing.
surprising for you.
Like, the big question thing? Oh. And then she. No, I realized that it was the crash. But I tell people that it's the
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much on there.
When I was 14, I had an economics professor who had all the kids, teacher, I guess, who got everybody's signature from their parents, and then had us start on, so like 14 kids.
Is that legal?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't accidentally mess with
I think if it's like, if your parent is like your proxy or your guarantor. We did that, but it was with fake money, not with real money. We did that too, where you start with like $1 million. Yeah, I'm like, my bad. But then we also did the trade thing. It worked perfectly because like all the kids started.
Okay. All right, so greetings everyone. I would like to introduce you our speakers for today. They're from the English department, and specifically the Peer Center. And yeah,
Okay.
thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks. All right. Can you see?
So we're very happy to be here from maybe not a well-known center on campus. The Pierce Center for Professional Communication is what it's called. And we are working with undergraduates and graduates on assisting them in finding writing opportunities, helping folks to improve their writing, improve in teaching and writing, and some time are now doing these workshops for folks like yourself. So we have three presenters here today. Phil Randall, who will go first, who has been a longtime teacher of scientific and technical writing on our campus, so he will be a great asset. Megan Petruszewski, who's a new comer to the department, but who did a wonderful set of workshops just very like this for the agricultural cooperative folks this summer. So she's going to have some wonderful things to say. And myself, Cameron Bushnell, I'm in the English department, but I have been directing the Pierce Center for 3 years now. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. We'll consider this very interactive. And so as we go along, if you end up with questions, feel free to raise your hands and we'll address them as we go along. So thank you. And Phil will go first here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be focusing on steps you would take at the very beginning of the science writing project, and that would involve the writing process. Here's where you would begin. It's a 5-step process, but it's recursive, meaning you don't have to go in lockstep, starting here and work your way down through the chain, but you can actually get into, for example, the drafting process and realize, hey, there's other things I want to research, or be over here in revision and go, I want to modify my plan. But there are also, even though it's not lockstep that you have to go in, you're going to want to touch on every one of these. And very often some of them are steps that we neglect, don't think are important, but are very important and what really distinguish fantastic science writing from mediocre writing. And I want to just give you a tip, just one tip about each one of these 5 steps of the process, and one writing secret that I think will really help you a lot. The first one in research is take good notes. When you are researching, it's really important for you to come up with a system, and I'm going to come back to this at the end of my talk because it's that important. But the bottom line is bad note-taking can get you in a lot of trouble, and we will look at that a little closer later. As far as planning goes, the key here is to just start. It's so easy to get writer's block or to just get hung up. But one of the things you can start to do is come up with a system that works for you, some sort of way to organize your thoughts. That's what you're trying to do. Get your thoughts organized, whether it's through a mind map, if you're visual, or an outline, which is more of the approach I would use. But you're going to just start getting some ideas down and start to organize this information. Then here's my big secret for you, the draft. Usually people get stuck and obsessed with the draft, pouring almost all of their work time into this middle step. But if you really want to take your paper up a notch, the best thing you can do is reduce the amount of time you obsess on your draft and push it into the edges. Spend much more time on your planning and much more time on your revision, and your paper will get better. The better the plan, the faster the draft will go. You can pop that thing out and really reduce the amount of time. This is like quicksand. This is where most people get stuck, okay? Now, as for revision, I brought a book because this is so important that I wanted to quote one of my favorite writers, Michael Alley. This is called The Craft of Scientific Writing. Perfect book for your professional library. You ought to get a copy. But he talks about this in revising. When he says, revise, revise, revise. And he says, revision is the key to strong scientific writing. The end, okay? Revision is the key to strong scientific writing. And then he goes on to say, for most of us, the key to successful writing lies in working hard on our revisions, not in conjuring magic on our first drafts. And that's why we get stuck with almost all our time poured into our draft. We're trying to conjure magic as right there in the process of drafting. But instead, revisit it and work it over and over again. And the last step is to edit, and that is just good packaging. But getting commas right, getting punctuation and spelling correct enhances your credibility. So it is an important step. All right. With the writing process as our foundation, I want to look at 6 activities that Lawrence Green outlined. He was a writing professor at the University of Colorado, was there for many years, developed all their science writing courses with the National Science Foundation. And out of all those years of work, he boiled it down into these 3 preliminary steps, these activities you want to do just to get started. And here they are listed, and you can go back and look at the PowerPoint. That's a quick snapshot. There's his book. Put the pictures of the book up because you might want to add them to they're worth money. They're good to add to your library. But let's go through each one of his 6. The first one being analyze your writing task. This is step 1 because it is the most common mistake. Not following the instructions on a writing task. I see it all the time grading undergrads. but I also see it, and professional reviewers see it all the time in the work by professionals. One of the most fundamental mistakes is not zeroing in, taking Green's tip, and make task analysis, a great way to put it, your very first step, task analysis, the first thing you do. So look at what's being asked, follow the instructions, especially in proposals. Here's another great book. These are some pretty harsh questions, but they give you, like, can you read? Did you listen? But I think that shows you the point of view where reviewers are coming from when they're looking at your stuff, and they're going, gee whiz, do these folks not, get our instructions? That's one of the most common problems. And here's a wonderful resource. Another one you can add to your professional library. I recommend it. It's really good. David Pugh and Terry Bacon. All right, the next step. Select a topic and refine the research issue. Now, the trick here to this slide is knowing the difference between a topic and an issue. If you try to write about a topic, you're not going to do well. So you've got to refine that thing and find the issue that is in there. Here are some examples of just topics. They're very vague, they're very broad, they don't pose any questions. They're just an interesting thing that those of us who are interested in them are satisfied with that. But it's not going to make you a paper. Water pollution and the hormone functions in fish. I'd like to know hormone disrupting chemicals in waterways. I'd like to know more about that. Those things concern me. But those are just topics. You're not going to write a paper about that. But when you turn it into an example, what you start to see is intriguing questions start to emerge, like this part. We know that endocrine disrupting chemicals such as PCBs and dioxins cause reproductive abnormalities in female fish, but we don't know. And here's what, little drama starts to come in. We don't know the specific biological mechanisms or the underlying causes by which these chemicals exert their effects. That's the mystery. That's what we're going to zoom in. That's what we've got a paper on. Or in the early development of rainbow trout, like that beautiful rainbow trout over there, which now that you've looked at the trout, focus over here. In the early development of rainbow trout, at which critical stages do endocrine disrupting pollutants affect the sexual development? I don't know. Let's do some research and find out. Now you've got an issue that you can glom onto. But Green's second point is clarify, or am I just looking at a topic, or have I refined it down into an issue that I can really get to work on? Okay. Third point, about just scientific discourse and the conventions, those classic genres you're going to use, the documents you're going to write. The three most common: research papers, review papers, research proposals. Those are the giants. Those are the ones that scientists spend the most time writing, but you need to learn about them. For example, in a research proposal, you are going to have to be persuasive. You're going to be making an argument about why your work's important and why it deserves to be funded. So this was going to be persuasive writing, whereas a research paper is going to be more evidence-based and making an argument that you've got important facts to be considered that you have dug up. So learn about those distinctions. What's going on in each one of these kinds of documents. All right. Analyze your audiences. Plural. More than one. When I was looking at this, I'm thinking about Lawrence Green and all his years, and distilled down in these 6 simple steps. I the first one I thought is, well, we got to think about who's going to read this stuff. Who are those people? You know? How much do they already know? One of the mistakes we often make is thinking we're so immersed in this stuff that we use shorthand that's convenient for us, but we don't see what our topic is through the eyes of somebody else. And I think that's the magic. Look at this through your reader's eye. What do they know and what they don't know? What biases might they be bringing to your work? How might they You've heard what people are saying about what you do. What misconceptions might you need to address to get them to see it right? Okay. Not only are your readers an audience, but also your journals. And this is a great quote from our own Stephen Katz, Clemson University, now retired, Ann Penrose also, about journals. Most journals are quite explicit. They will tell you, if you will investigate them, about their audiences and their goals, and post guidelines on their websites. So you would investigate right there. All right, searching for scientific literature. Because I work with undergraduates, I think there's a lot more confusion over primary and secondary audiences or sources than you're going to have, I'm sure. But it doesn't hurt to refresh on these fundamentals, just as a reminder. Hey, am I looking at primary sources? Am I looking at secondary sources? How credible are these journals? You know, and you would know that by the impact factor, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But just one more time, the influence that a journal has within the profession is measured, and the higher the impact factor, the more credible it is. There are names out there that are the leaders in your field. Who are those leaders? Who are those people? Are those people writing for this journal? Who are the big dogs in whatever field you are involved in? And so forth. So search through that scientific literature. Get familiar with them. And one of the important things to do is know, well, who are the big players? So I went to our science librarian. I put her picture up here and want to give her thanks for her hard work. And I asked her, okay, here's my audience. Forestry, wildlife, life sciences. These are the people that are going to be looking at this. And this is her expertise. You spent years looking at these journals and so forth. So what do you think, Margie, when it comes to what you've seen as an expert, but also the impact factors? Figure that in too. And tell me, what are some leading journals that students ought to recognize and they ought to gravitate to first, and where you really want to get published first? So if you're in forestry, here are some big names for you. If you're in agriculture, here are some names of some big journals for you. These are top journals in your field, in her very well-informed opinion, and according to impact factors. If you're in life sciences, a little tough category, it goes in a lot of directions, but here are some great titles for you. Wildlife management, there were a lot. She whittled them down. We started out with about 20, and she said, no, so a lot of these journals don't really have any impact at all. But here are some ones that have some real impact. They're high profile, they're prestigious. Okay, good to know. If I'm in wildlife management, I ought to know those. All right. Next part, step 6 of Lawrence Green's 6 steps. The most important part is the back half of this quote. He says, excellence in scientific writing obviously depends on strong basic communication skills. Okay, you got to be a writer. We need you to be good writers. especially in your fields. I mean, we're looking at climate change, we're looking at species dying off and so forth. How are we going to understand what's going on unless you become not just scientists but science communicators? I really think that's the challenge of 21st century scientists. And that's why I wanted to come today, because it's important. I won't understand it if you don't communicate with me, a layperson, effectively. So I know what kind of action I might be able to take to resolve some of these problems. So, this is important, but at least equally important, okay, which means even more so, at least equally important, however, is extensive science content. You got to know what you're talking about. So how do you get there? Okay? You're reading for understanding. It's some of the stuff you may be reading is so dense, I'd recommend just patience. Just look stuff up. Try it again. Slow down. It's not a race to get to the end of something, but you're reading for understanding. And one option that I think is fantastic, and I wanted to point it out to you, is Cornell Notes. Anybody here used Cornell Notes? Familiar with them? Couple? Okay, this is a great tool. If you're trying to deal with something and it's just too mind-bending, but you need to get a grip on it, here's a tool I really love. You take a sheet of paper, you divide it up like this, sort of a funky eye pattern, and you're going to put different sorts of information on there, like the topic, the time, the date of what you're reading about. And as you're reading or viewing a video or something, you're just putting notes in here. Okay, that's your next step. You're going to put notes in there. And then over here, you're just going to jot down some key ideas. Main takeaways that you're trying to pull out of a chapter. Okay? And then at the end, in your own words, sum it up. What's the bottom line here? So if I did that on this book, took a chapter out of a book, compressed it into one page using Cornell Notes, this is what I came up with. Okay? Planning's important. Oh, we've been talking about that already. Audience, most important first step, envision the audience. That matches what Lawrence Green said. Okay, and this other stuff, tone and so forth, pretty cool. And then just some summary at the end. My particular interest was this whole thing about register. And so after my notes, I penciled in something there. Okay, so just in closing, let me say one more important step about notes, and then Megan's going to take over with, that's the getting started part. How do you accomplish it? But let me just leave you with this thought, circling back to the beginning. Notes can get you in trouble. You want to not be a sloppy note taker. You need to develop a system that you are religious about. And here's the reason. If you're just like copying stuff out of a book, oh, that's good, and you write it down, you're going to be writing out of your notes, probably. And before long, it's easy to not be able to tell, hey, was that my idea or was that Lawrence Green's idea? Did I cook up that sentence or did Lawrence Green cook up that sentence? And I just thought it was so good I put it down there. You need to be able to tell what came from where. And so come up with a note-taking system and stick to it. It will really help you a lot. So that's how you get started. And Megan is going to talk to you next about how to accomplish a science writing project.
All right, yeah, thanks, Phil. So now that we have our solid starting steps for what to look for, how to get started with the project, let's talk about the mechanics of doing it. And after we have that first draft, what are some things that we can look back on to check to see if our writing flows, if it has style, and is it going to be effective for our audience? So the first thing, and Phil touched on this a lot too, right? Our audience, who are we writing for? And I know a lot of you are writing for scholarly journal articles, and so that's going to be your audience. But equally important is thinking about how you might translate your work to a more general or popular audience. And we do this all the time when we speak, right? The way that you talk about your research with other grad students or professors is really different than the way that you talk about that with a 12-year-old or someone that has never heard of what you do. So keep this in mind too with your writing. It's the same idea here. And then related to our audience and our purpose, again, what's our goal? To inform or to educate, maybe to persuade. We want to think about our organization pattern too. So a lot of journal articles structured the same way, right? Introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. But if you're not following a journal article like that, or you're writing something again for a popular audience or a different sort of audience, different kind of document, be intentional with how you're organizing that. Are you going to use maybe a chronological pattern to talk about the life stages of this invasive species? Or are you going to talk about a comparison and contrast of treatment options? So I won't talk about all of these, but just this idea of that we're being intentional about the way that we're organizing our main points. Really, this kind of macro level overview can go a long way in helping your writing be effective for its target audience. All right, so now these kind of mechanics, like the nitty-gritty, the English stuff that people think about. Here are 3 main takeaways for you to think about as you revise your documents. So let's say that we've written that first draft, and now we're starting to look back on the actual writing itself. So this very first thing is going to be concrete nouns and clear verbs. So just a quick review, quick refresh. What's a noun? Anyone be willing to just share one?
Person, place, thing, or idea.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. So person, place, thing, or an idea. And then a verb, what is that? Action, right. Yes, exactly. So another quick check-in here. Go ahead and read both of these, and then think about which one is what you would say better writing. All right, first one. Show of hands. Okay, second one. Okay, so overall kind of consensus was the second one. It's shorter, right? We can see that right away. Let's break this down a little bit. So the second one is using a concrete noun as its subject. So a concrete noun is something that appeals to our 5 senses. It's something that we could see, we could hear it, we could touch it, we could taste it, we could smell it too. So things like a bird, right, or a tree, or a leaf, or even like a bacteria or a virus, whatever your research is about. Versus these abstract nouns, we use these all the time in science writing, and it's not that they're wrong, but they're harder for us to hang on to, right? Understanding, observation, investigation, it's more theoretical, it's harder for us to picture. So the second one uses concrete nouns as its subject. So these are all things that we can see and visualize more clearly. Versus the first one uses behavioral manifestations, which is again something that's harder for us to cling on to. So I'm not saying that this first one is incorrect. I mean, you could write this and it would probably maybe fit well with your journal, maybe the style that you're used to seeing. But if you're maybe writing for a more general audience, I would have a harder time understanding that, or maybe you're under a tighter word count. Just consider what your subject is, and if it's this concrete noun, or if it's something that's more abstract. And the second thing we can see here too is also our verb. So in the second one, we have behave as our verb, and that's again something that is strong. We can visualize that, we can see what a behavior is. Versus this first one, have been shown. That's something that's a lot less clear to us, right? It's more vague, kind of more, it's hard to visualize. So another thing we can do is use strong verbs in our writing. So here are 2 more examples. I'll let you read them. So in the second one, we have these different verbs, these stronger verbs, again, things that we could see or visualize more clearly, right? Conserve and manage. That's stronger, it's clearer to us than the word is, which is underlined up here. So just bringing a little bit more attention to what our subjects are, and if they're these concrete nouns, and what our verb choice is like as well. And then we can think about where our subjects and our verbs are in the sentence. So here are two more examples. So I've underlined the subject of the first one, which is us, or our ability. And then our verb is way farther down the end of the sentence, which is, versus the second one, where we have our subject and our verb much closer together. So we can think about, again, how closely our verbs and our subjects are together in the sentence. All right, I know this is going to be controversial right away, right? Active voice. So a lot of times we want to avoid using we or I in writing. And that probably depends on the conventions of your journal. I've heard that more and more journals are accepting we and I in the writing. But again, tie it back, like Phil said, to the individual journal that you're writing for. Do they permit this? And if not, don't use it. But if they do, consider using we or I or the active voice in your writing, because there was a study done that showed that it's 30% shorter than the passive voice. So a quick review here. This first one is written in the passive voice, and maybe you're used to seeing things like this, or maybe you write this way too. The data were collected using these methods by the researchers. Versus in the active voice, we collected the data, right? So you can see how this active voice one, where we're talking about the subject is really clear. We did that. It's visually much shorter than that passive version. So again, just thinking about how much room you have, what the conventions of your journal is, who your audience is as well. Would they accept the shorter version where we are the subject, or should the focus be on the data? So a couple more examples, right? The cats were eaten by mice versus the mice ate the cats. I know this is flip-flop, but just did that to see if you're paying attention. So this one we have the receiver of the action, which is the cats. Then we have our action, we're eaten. And then the doer of the action is mice. And again, this one is passive. This is the passive construction. So to change this into this active version, we're going to ask ourselves who's the subject. So who is doing the stuff. And then this one, it's the mice. And the top one would be the researchers. They're the subject. They're the ones doing the action. And then we look for what the action is. So the first one, collected. The second one, eaten. And then we can flip the order. So it becomes the doer of the action, the mice, the action ate, and then the subject, or the object. All right, and then watch the shun words. So what do I mean by that? Maybe you've seen something set up like this before. An investigation of algae management strategies is undertaken in this paper, or an investigation of whatever you study was undertaken. What if we change that to this paper investigates algae management strategies? So this is another abstract noun, right? The shun word, investigation. And we can change that into a verb form to be clear and also more concise, shorter. So let's look at some more examples here. We could change evaluation to evaluate, or evaluates, determination, determine, and etc. So you can look for these larger words, these shun words. We even do like a control find in your document. And then ask yourself, is there a way that I could change this into a verb to make the sentence shorter or more concise? Or, as Anne Green argues in her book, Writing Science in Plain English, sometimes you can find these words and then just substitute them for something shorter. So this first one is an example of a piece of science writing she says that could be revised. And the second one is her revision of this. So she changed, among other things in here, one of the things she changed was the word initiation to before. So just using a shorter equivalent for the same word means the same thing, but it's shorter, it's more straightforward. And then she also changed ingestion preferences to feeding preferences. And there's some other revisions there, but you kind of get the concept, right? You can find these shun words, either change them to verbs, or find a shorter equivalent for the same word. Okay, so that was the first thing, right? Think about our nouns and think about our verbs. And the second one is really about connecting all of these ideas that we already have. So we have these beautifully constructed sentences. How do you put them together to make meaning for the reader? So the first thing, or the first insight, is putting old information at the beginning of sentences and new information at the end. And I'll give you a second to read this example to you. So right away we're starting off with this concrete noun, right? Quantum mechanics. Maybe you don't know, I know I don't know much about quantum mechanics at all, but that's something you can still kind of picture in your head. So we're starting off with that, and then we're introducing new information afterwards. So each of these sentences is starting with a reference to the previous subject, that old information, and then it's introducing that new information at the end of the sentence. So it's referring to quantum mechanics, has explained structures and interactions. This is new information. And then the second part over here, it is implied. So it has given rise, again referring to that older information about quantum mechanics. And then the new information down here is revolutionary technologies and circuit chips, etc. And in this last sentence here, after this little introductory element, it, again referring back to our old information, quantum mechanics, has generated puzzles. So that's that newer information being established at the end of the sentence. So as human beings, we like that. We like to start with what we know. We like to start with the old information, and then we like to learn the new information. And kind of think about this too, like on a macro level with a paper, like research articles that you read. They start with introductions, maybe like a literature review, establishing what we already know about this topic, and then you move into your methods and your results in your discussion. So you're ending with what you're contributing to the conversation, what the new information is. And so that's kind of the same pattern, that old, what we already know, to what we're learning, what's new. And we can think about that same organization on the sentence level as well. So a couple more examples here. Go ahead and read these, and then think to yourself which one you think is clear, or which one is just better writing. Alright, first one, anyone? Second one? Okay, so let's break this down a little bit again. In the second one, we're going to skip down to the good one, or the better one first. We have new information, or the new information about BMA established at the end of this first sentence. And then that second sentence begins referring back to that older information, right? The end of that other sentence. So just visually, you can kind of see with the black text here how those related ideas are closer together. And again, that just helps us anchor down to what we already know so we can learn new information. So the pattern is a little bit more from A to B, B to C, C to D, versus the top one is sort of A to B to C to B, and it kind of zigzags that way. So just think about putting related ideas closer together. And on a similar note, how we're connecting our sentences together. So a paragraph is more than just a passage of sentences together, next to each other. We also want to think about how our sentences are connected to establish ideas and to make sense for the readers. So this yellow tab over here on the side, Mike Alley argues that transition words have three functions. So they help us continue our ideas, they help us pause for emphasis, and then they also help us contrast our ideas together. So this is an excerpt from Victoria McMillan's book, Writing Papers in Biological Sciences. And she's using some transition words here to show the relationship of ideas. So taking advantage of transition words not only throughout your paper from paragraph to paragraph, but also how you're linking ideas and thoughts together within your sentences. Are you contrasting these ideas together? Are you going to continue this example? Are you going to pause so the reader can understand this more? But just kind of being intentional with how you want to string these ideas together. All right, now being concise. We all know why that's important, right? So one thing to think about in the revision process is to just revise your document one time with the only goal of cutting words. So a lot of times when we reread our writing, we have a bunch of different priorities. We're looking for, do we have all this information? Do we have sentences that flow together? Did we set everything right? Did, all these other questions you might have. But if you can really zero in on one goal, I'm going to reread my document or my abstract, and just have the goal of cutting words that aren't adding anything to the message. That can kind of target your revision process a little bit more, and hopefully just kind of help you be more aware of the individual word choices you have there. And the second one is going to be avoiding needless repetition. So let's look at an example here. Does anyone see anything we could cut out? Yeah.
Control Dashboard can be abbreviated to EAB.
Right? Yeah, we could abbreviate this pretty quickly. Anything else?
Very.
Very.
I mean, it's called the Emerald Ash Borer, so you probably don't need to say what color it is.
Okay, right. So is that part even necessary in there? Great. Yeah, so you guys nailed a lot of them. I don't have the abbreviation one in there, but that could definitely be added. So the word very, right? Green in color, you already know green's a color. The city of Detroit, we know Detroit's a city. First discovered is redundant. So if we just go into this with our sole goal of cutting words that aren't adding to the meaning, we could get pretty far. And the other thing is to think about your narration or your thoughts that aren't adding to the message. So a lot of times in our drafts, we put in sort of our thought process, and that's totally fine for that first draft. But as you go in and revise, watch these kind of phrases that aren't adding to the message. So for example, there's evidence from Paul Cox that ALS is linked to BMA exposure. We could just write evidence from him as linked to this, right? So a lot of times there are constructions don't really add to the message, and so that can just be something that you look forward to in your work. And then, right, using one word instead of a phrase, and you can just Google this sometime too, one word equivalents for phrases, and you should probably get a bunch of examples and different phrases that you could substitute for one word, or the opposite, one word that you can substitute for a phrase. This would be one example. Here's some more. And then last piece here is being positive instead of being negative, which is just good life advice in general. But thinking about what words you can substitute for negative construction. So maybe you go through your document and you do a control find for the word not, and you think about, can I substitute this for one word that says the same thing, but is one word instead of three words. And these are all from Anne Green's book, Writing Science in Plain English. It's a good resource too if you want to look at that. And then last piece here that relates to being concise and also clear is parallel lists. So if I said this, I like swimming, running, and to bike, that would sound strange to you, right? It would be much more natural to say, I like swimming, biking, and running. So same thing in your writing, as you have lists of items, are they parallel? So by that, do all the words match? Do they all match in a series? And a lot of times that third item is the one that gets overlooked because it's farther along in our thought process. So another just kind of thing to look at in your writing, when you have a list, do all of these items match each other? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bushnell to talk about how to take your science writing and get that published.
Okay, great.
I should pause for a minute. Any questions that we'd like to pose right now? Okay, well, we'll go to the tricky part, maybe. Okay, so getting published. These are all from Science Magazine, from the Association of American Academy of Science. What is that what that AAAS stands for? I'm not sure. Anyway, one of the things, so these would be, again, we have lots of lists of quick tips. So one of the things I might leave you with is something that you've already heard from Phil and from Megan, is that in order to produce a really good paper, you have to read, and you have to learn how to read critically, and that often means slowing down. In other words, sometimes we as graduate students just like, okay, I have like 92 papers to get through, plus I have to grade these over here, et cetera, et cetera. So you're skimming rather than slowing down. So it's kind of counterintuitive to think that you should be reading slower when you have so much. But I would urge you to read so that you can read for the nuances of your text. I guess that's just fundamental to good research and probably things that you're already doing. Think in figures, they suggest. So one of the really interesting things about getting something published is to figure out when is the best moment to publish. And that best moment is when you have enough data, but not too much, right? Too little, and you may just be wasting your time. Okay, I see this, so I'm editing the WAC journal, which is a writing journal, but still it comes back with, that writer had too few samples to be convincing. So you can't have too little data, and yet if you wait too long, you have too much data, you're overwhelmed with data, you can actually get scooped. So think as you're going along and taking notes. Do I now have is this the time? Do I have something to publish now? Have I reached a critical mass of data? Choose the appropriate journal. And here I'm going to just, I'm going to argue with Phil a little bit, because the appropriate journal may not actually be the top journal in your field. There are literally thousands and thousands. You probably know there's hundreds of thousands of journals. And in your field, I'm sure hundreds of potential. So you don't want to underestimate your work. I totally agree with that. Don't underestimate yourself. But on the other hand, you may not want to go right for the top, at least at the beginning. Sometimes it's good to get, the top journals sometimes will want something that's innovative, unique, unexpected findings. You may not be ready to produce that, but what you are ready to produce is consistent, steady work that progresses the field. And this is going to be welcome in many, many journals. And so get your name out there. As soon as you're published, you can publish easier in the next place. I know you already do that. Submit high quality paper. I'm going, yeah, I think we all know that, right? That's kind of obvious. But as we've been saying here, one of the things that's really interesting is that inattention to the writing process can scuttle the best research. So you can have meticulous data, wonderful finding, excellent whatever. And if you have not been able to make a story, make a narrative, present it in a way that's convincing, it still won't get published, even though it should. So attention to writing really will help you, of course, get published. And even though you feel kind of like you're, okay, here it is, and I'm just depending on somebody to recognize it, you can actually facilitate a good review by really paying attention to the cover letter and the special considerations, the cover letter being maybe the most important thing. In other words, in the cover letter, in 2 or 3 sentences, you want to get a full review of what it is that you're going to present in that paper, so that your editor knows in just a few sentences what it is that your point that you're trying to make. So the cover letter is influential in getting the first review. Okay. So there's the checklist from the editor's point of view, and I'm just going to pay attention to 2 sides here. One, you probably, maybe you already know, that the title, not surprisingly, is the most read item of your paper. That's kind of funny, actually. But of course, things are indexed by title, et cetera, et cetera. Your abstract is the second most read item in your paper, and that makes sense too. But the other thing that's very interesting about it is that some editors will make a decision about whether or not to publish depending on your abstract. So you think here's these 250 words or 150 words that you have, you are actually somehow making an argument for your paper in that abstract. That I cannot emphasize how important it is. And just think about you when you do your research. How do you know to pull that article? You know it from the abstract, right? You are making an evaluation on whether or not you're going to use something for your research based on the abstract. The other thing is that I haven't seen much, and I would just really like to emphasize that your most important thing that you add, the thing that you add to any scholarship is what I would call, or what this person too also calls, the thread. In other words, how you get from point A to point B through your paper. That is your narrative thread. That is what you add, because here you have this piece of information that you've gotten from investigator X. This team adds this. That team adds this, and you conglomerate a lot of information together, and what you add is the thread. It's like a pathway through this art, through all of this data that you've collected. So do not neglect to give your readers a way to get through your paper. Okay, rejection, it happens, and regrettably, it happens maybe more than we like to think about. As we see here, 21% of the submissions of papers that are submitted to journals are rejected without even getting a review. It's never sent out. It's never sent out to peer review. Nobody else reads it except the editor or the editor's assistant, or maybe the review board if the journal has one. 40% are rejected even after they've been through a review, even if they've been out to peer review. The good thing is that I think rejections often include what we call a very positive thing, and that's called revise and resubmit. The language is usually something like, even though we're not going to accept your paper as is right now, in other words, we're rejecting it, if you rewrite it, we would be happy to send it out again. So it's counted as a rejection, but if you get a revise and a resubmit, I hope you're all just leaping for joy. That's a very positive development in the course of your development of your paper. So additionally, the average acceptance for conferences is something like only 25 to 30%. So in other words, rejection is going to happen, and I was at a presentation by NIH, a fellow who was talking about NIH grants, and he said, it's absolutely, you are going to be rejected the first time around. Do not even worry about it, because if you're not rejected, rejection is good because that means you've actually had somebody who has eyes on it, that has in terms of a grant. So rejection is just really a part of being a scientist or being any kind of writer. So do not let it slow you down. Having a paper rejected has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good or whether or not it's, what I'm trying to say, it's not a bad paper just because it was rejected, right? That many, many things can happen in terms of review. You can get a reviewer who's not quite an expert in your field and therefore rejects it because you don't have the right reader. That happens. You have somebody who, a lot of times this will happen in my own journal. Somebody reads it, loves it. Somebody else reads it and says, well, no, I don't think so. And when you end up with a balance or a split, it will often get rejected or a revised resubmit. Anyway, just part of the process. So what do you do? What do you do? Facing rejection. Okay, so the first advice is take your pulse. Okay. I'm still living. Even though you open the letter, you've gotten your response, you open your email, it can really be kind of deflating at the very least, right? It's like, oh no, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to leave this field. Maybe I'll just quit now and go home, and I'm not going to ever submit another paper and go through this again. And unfortunately, that, people get discouraged because, unfortunately, I don't know enough about your field, but in our field, we can have vicious reviews. It's like, what, that person has obviously not read so-and-so. And it's like, okay, so it can be deflating, it can be sad, it can be depressing. So you take your pulse, you get a whole, you can say, okay, rejections are making me feel this way, and this is how I should feel. And then you read the rejection letter, and here's a piece of advice. I have gotten many rejection letters, and I will read the rejection letters, and I will go really, really fast, like super fast, as fast as I can, just to sit, so that I know that I did get rejected. And then I will put it in a drawer. And I will come back in a day, or a week, or a month. And whenever it is that I think that I can actually open that drawer again, take that letter out and say, okay, all right, what did he say, right? This is maybe something that helps you. Follow the author's instructions when you get it. So this could be very helpful. One of the things that I have heard is that if you take that letter and you annotate it, you literally make notes and you say, okay, what the heck is this guy saying in this first paragraph? And you say, oh yeah, he's saying X. And I'm going to write it in my own words. And you go through each paragraph and you write in your own words, and what happens? Suddenly that rejection is something that you have interpreted for yourself that allows you to be able to address it. So I really follow the author instructions, but do not forget to sort of summarize for yourself what it is you think that person is saying. Match your paper to your journal. You may need to do a little bit of a realignment. Is your paper actually belong in this journal? Have you actually met the format, or are you actually talking about what this journal is really interested in? And it may go to the last point there. You may actually choose a new journal. Even if you get a revise and resubmit, you can say, okay, I'm really done with you. You didn't want it. Okay, you missed. And then you can say, I really think it's more suited for this other journal, and you can choose someplace else. And then the other thing, of course, is that you may need to go through the step of getting a little more data or reanalyzing the data. Okay, so responding, you now have your reviewers. You're going to revise and submit. How is it that you're going to respond? So here's one way, the calm way, and this is how it was listed in somebody's clever version of this. So one of the pieces of advice is just what we were just talking about. Kind of stay cool. Come back to your letter when you can face it with sort of a cool manner, and you can actually really begin to understand what it is they're saying. Answer or amend or advocate. Just because somebody, even though the last one said follow what the author is saying, you don't have to accept it. You can say, are you kidding? That person just didn't understand what I was trying to say. And I said it this way for a particular reason, and I'm sticking to it. And that's when you might want to find a different journal. Maybe it's not aligned properly. So you do not have to always follow the advice. Make yourself a list for how you're going to address each one, because in your letter, in your cover letter that goes back with your revision, you're going to say, I did this, I did that, and I addressed this point, and I addressed that point in this way. And you're going to make sure you have a list so you can address it in your cover letter. And then you are mindful of the editor, and you provide a list of responses, you track your changes, and you make it clear. Present them a clean version of the document without any changes on it when you send it back. Okay, and then this is just it's kind of an overview of the same sorts of things with a little bit of a funny cartoon here, and that says, No, if you make the paper too easy to read, everyone will know how you got the results. So perhaps we've felt this way in terms of our own paper, our own advice that we've gotten. Again, just very quickly, this is in responding to your reviewers, provide an overview. In the first sentence you say, I revised this article and the main thing that I did was this, I reconceptualized the data, reinterpreted the data. Be polite, accept the blame. I thought this was an interesting one. In other words, I think I did not make myself 100% clear in this section, and I have revised it in this way. So you're not putting it off on somebody else. Make sure that you make it self-contained. In other words, don't send them out to refer to another document somewhere or the previous version. Don't just, everything is right there so they can see it. Make sure you hit every point. Use typography. That means italicize when you change something or bold when you've made a change. Be direct. Do what the reviewer asks and mark the changes. Our sort of overview in a nutshell, if you will. All right, that's all we have today. But I wonder if you have questions about any part of about the writing process from soup to nuts, and that we can answer. Yes.
This is a question for Megan.
Oh.
When you're doing the method, when you're writing the method, how do you divide? How many times you can use the I, we, collect, all blah 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 in the paragraph?
I think that really depends on the journal that you're writing for, because sometimes they might not want you to use that at all. So I would just think stylistically, like if you're repeating I or we a lot and it sounds redundant or like it's distracting the way that's being used, then don't use it. And again, if your journal doesn't allow it, then don't use that either. Does that answer your question at all? Okay.
Are there things to look for in a rejection letter that might indicate whether it's better to resubmit to the same journal after making revisions or redoing analyses versus submit to a different journal altogether?
Yeah, I think if the editor comes back and says, your peer reviewers have really like your ideas, and yet they would like to see these revisions, and if they offer to resend it out, that would be like the number one thing. Look, if they are willing to take a chance on contacting new peer reviewers, you're safe with that. If for some reason you're getting, I had recently a split review where somebody wanted to publish, but the other person said, I do not recommend publication for you. I ended up doing a revise and resubmit based on the positive review, but I was thinking the author's going to read the negative review and is going to wonder whether or not they are in the right place. So I think you'll probably, that if they really want to publish it, they will encourage you greatly, I think, to come back. Let us see a second version of this. Good question.
What happens when the journalist ask you to suggest who is going to be reviewer?
Yeah. You mean when the author asks who will be the reviewer? Yeah.
Or they don't have a specialty in this field, and then they may ask you who is going to be your reviewer.
Yeah, that